Okay, well, there's a lot going on in the readings today. One hardly knows where to begin. And as tempting as it is to stay with Jezebel, I'm going to move right on past Jezebel and focus really on the gospel for this morning, which in itself has, I think, two component stories. But first, let me say that if you're anxious about this seeming like Jesus as guilty of animal cruelty, let me just put it a little bit in context for you all. And that is, of course, we're dealing with a culture that believed that behavior such as the man exhibits in the story was due to demonic possession. And in our greater understanding of the human psyche, we now would perhaps say that this person was suffering from some grave mental illness, possibly. We're not told. But what's part of the story is it's about pigs. And the reason that's important to note is nothing against pigs, although I do think, and I'll talk more about how pigs often get kind of the bum racket of how we talk about them and think about them. They're actually very intelligent, very clean creatures, but we tend to put upon them a mythology that says otherwise. But anyway, remember that the Jewish people would not have kept pigs because they weren't kosher. They weren't to be eaten. So these pigs are either just part of a farmyard or they're the food to be fed to the Gentiles. But pigs were not part of what was sanctified or holy in the Jewish culture. That's not to say that there aren't confusing parts of this story, but that's part of the context. So I want to start thinking about pigs, actually, and the ways that we think about them. And of course, I brought an assistant to help me. Okay, he seems pretty stable. This pig has rested at our front door since Tim and I bought our house that we owned in Bedford. And when we bought the house in Bedford, it was the only time Tim and I have ever come close to Hollywood glamour and royalty, because we bought the house from Heather Previn, who was the 4th, 5th, 16th wife of Andre Previn. And there had been a very terrible divorce, and Heather had bought the house that we bought from her as kind of a refuge in the midst of that terrible emotional divorce. And one of the things I loved about Heather was how funny she was. She is an extraordinary person. And it became clear that Heather was going to be a little bit at loose ends come the closing on the house. And so I said, in I thought a diplomatic way, it's summer and I have extra time. If you'd like me to help you pack up all the stuff that you have in this house, I'd be glad to help you. Little did I know it would become a leitmotif in my entire existence. So I would go over on summer days and help Heather pack up things. And one day she came down from the upstairs bedrooms and she was dressed in this beautiful gown. And she came down the front stairs very elegantly and came down. And I said, "Heather, what are you wearing?" And she said, "One of the 24 Oscar dresses that I wore every year to the Academy Awards." And then I said, "Really? Do you have more?" And she said, "Oh, I have them all." So then the afternoon was spent with her coming down the stairs in this wonderful fashion show. But back to pigs. So at the closing, Heather said, "Richard and Tim, I'm going to leave you the guardian of my front door, which is a pig. And my only requirement is that you keep the name that I've given this pig." We said, "Sure, what's his name?" And she said, "Andre." So this is Andre the pig. And Andre is not unlike the poor pigs in the story in that a lot gets put upon these poor pigs. And it's interesting in the story, and there is actually a funny moment in today's gospel. I know no one really believes that the Bible is particularly humorous, but it's a very subtle little moment of humor in the pig story, which is we're told that having witnessed this entire herd of pigs go over the cliff and into the lake and drown, we're told that the people were afraid. And what they probably were afraid of is that all the other pigs in the countryside were going to have the same fate under Jesus' guidance. But that's a small bit of humor. In the story itself, there's something else that's very compelling, I think. And that is the story of the man possessed of a demon. We're set up in the story in a very dramatic narrative. We're told that this is someone who is really over the top, who is so out of control and whose life is so chaotic, and they are so outside of civilized society and behavior that there's no holding him back. He's not only possessed of a demon, but he seems to be possessed of all the energy in the world that is chaotic. So we're told that he's naked, that he yells and is not controllable. And we're told that people try to control him by chaining him, and he breaks the chains. And nothing can be done. It's an extreme case of someone whose life is completely out of order. And what's extraordinary is in the interchange between the man and Jesus, he begins, as he often does, with a very personal question, which is, what is your name? And he responds with the possession still. I am Legion. I have many, many names because of all the demons that possess me. And then when the demons have left the man in the exorcism that Jesus performs, we're then given a part of the story that I find completely captivating and compelling and very, very moving. And that is, after this great moment, this big dramatic moment you can imagine of this exorcism, and the man is freed from this demonic possession. The next time we see him, he's seated at Jesus' feet and is quiet. So already there's a profound change in the man's life. And there's something about that image of someone who was so at risk, being comforted and comfortable sitting at the feet of Jesus. But it gets even better. Because then the man says, I want to be your disciple. Let me join you in your journey. And what Jesus says to him is, no, go home. Have a life. Enjoy the things that give all of us joy now that you're okay. And what's extraordinary in that is, first of all, Jesus' lack of ego. I mean, who among us would not like a few more disciples? People following us around telling us we're the Messiah. Who would not like that? But Jesus sees into the heart of the man and knows what's missing. And that's a life, a normal life. And Jesus says, go have that life. That's what this gift of healing is about. I find that very moving. That when we hear God's voice through Jesus, God's voice wants our happiness, our peace, contentment, opportunities, our daily life. And then you have the story from the Jewish Testament about Elijah. And Elijah is a rock star among prophets. And unfortunately, he's the last one standing and therefore a target. So he flees Ahab and Jezebel to try to protect himself from being killed. He's filled with fear, and he still expects God to appear in dramatic ways. So we're told in the story that there's a mighty wind, and there's an earthquake, and there's a great fire, but God is in none of these. And instead, when it comes time for God to talk to Elijah, it's in quiet. It's in silence. And the message there is, as much as we expect the big dramatic moments to be our defining moments, we're really defined by our daily lives, by our relationships and who we are in those daily lives. We don't have to find God in the biggest, most dramatic moments of life, but in our daily life. Now, one thing Anglicanism has always made clear, and one of the great joys of Anglicanism, is it's never rejected our real human lives. It's never said that your lives, because we're human, are sinful by their very nature. Instead, Anglicanism has said your daily lives are infused with God's grace and love. And the smallest parts of your life point you to God, whether it's the people we love, the work you do, the homes we have, the lives we have, our friends and our families. All of these things are of God. And they point us to the divine. We don't reject the real stuff of our lives, but instead celebrate it as being infused with the divine. George Herbert, the great Anglican priest and poet, talked about the daily round in which God is revealed. In the sweeping of the kitchen floor, in daily tasks, that God is revealed in the smallest moments, not the big grand ones necessarily. So it's very powerful, I think, that when it comes for the man to live the rest of his life, it isn't necessarily in the drama of being a disciple of Jesus, but the gift that is given him is a return to a normal life, something all of us crave in our own lives. To have friends and family and celebrations and joys and challenges, all the things that make up our real life lives. And there is another way that the gospel then points us always, not just inward, but outward as well. And that is to say, we're meant to think of the people who aren't grounded in stability and a home. We're meant to remember that if we have been given the great gift of home, of being at home, others have not gotten that gift. And part of our ministry is always to ensure that they know the security and the peace that we have known. And we do that through the many ways we can support and help people whose lives are infused with chaos and uncertainty. It's part of our calling. So, there's great comfort in Jesus saying, go home, enjoy your home, love your life, celebrate it, and probably give the gift of life that I've given you today. One of the great themes often preached about at Christmas Eve is the idea of coming home, of being home for Christmas. And I think it's kind of wonderful on this Sunday in June that we too are given that Christmas message. Come home. Be at home. Celebrate God in every moment of your lives and offer that as a gift to others. Amen.